All right, guys, we're going to be going over this practice test for Chapter 6 summative exam, okay? Let me tell you, this is almost identical to the test. The test will be two-sided, okay? And this is the front side. It could be a little confusing. This is especially why I made the practice test, so you won't be confused on the actual test. So, as you can see, this is the front part of the test. It says questions numbers 1 and 2. Solve the following systems by graphing on your answer sheet. It says backside. So you actually have to flip this paper over to see the backside, and it says up here answer sheet. So you flip it over and you'll see this backside. And there is a couple of typos on this practice test. I apologize. Make sure that you actually have a 4 down there on that first system of equations number 1. Now, they do want you to graph. You don't get points if you don't graph it, okay? So let's take a look at the top equation, which is in y equals mx plus b. So it's already ready to graph. So if you have two different colored pens, right now is the time to take it out. Let's do this top first equation in red. So it does cross at 2. That's the b value, which is the y-intercept value. So it crosses the y-axis at 2. Now from that point, you know it's going to cross maybe like this, maybe like that, maybe really steep up, maybe not so steep up. It all depends on your steepness, which is your slope. So you rise 5 and you run 2. So from this point, you're going to rise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're off the graph and then run 2. So your dot's going to be right there somewhere. Let me actually just, even though it's totally off the graph, I'm going to put the dot there. Now this is kind of ridiculous because up 5 over 2 is off the graph. So what you have to do, and what you're going to have to do on the test itself, it will the same situation. You're going to go off the graph. So you need to go with that pattern backwards. Instead of going up 5 over 2, go over 2 this way, then down 5. Over 2 this way, then down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put a dot right here at -2, -3. And let's just draw the line. This is a regular equation. It's a regular line, so let's draw it. There it is. I could have done it a little better right there. Whoops, that is so ugly. Sorry. Anyway, you get the idea. So let's do the other line in blue. Now, remember, there was a typo. There used to be a 1 right here. It's now a 4. Okay, it's supposed to be a 4. So the other one, it's not ready to graph. It doesn't have y by itself. It's not in y equals mx plus b form. So you really have a -2 times y, and you don't want that multiplication of -2, so you do the opposite, which is dividing by -2. And what you do to one side, you do to the entire other side. In other words, you're going to divide everything by -2. So this x, well, it's really a -1x. You need to divide it by -2. And the 4, you need to divide it by -2. So if you rewrite it in blue, y equals -1 divided by a -2 is a positive 1 divided by 2. With an x, and 4 divided by -2 is -2. So here's my slope-intercept form equation in blue. Now it really is ready to graph. It crosses the y-axis at -2. Why is that? Because that's the b value. And of course the m value, from that point, it's up 1 over 2. So if you go up 1 over 2, you're going to end up at that coordinate of 2, -1. And of course, you could keep going with that pattern up 1 over 2, or you could even use it backwards, over 2, down 1, over 2, down 1. So notice on both of these lines, it was important to use the pattern backwards to extend the line. So if you draw your line now, you will see, very clearly see, that this is your point of intersection. Okay, so if they're asking us to solve, which they are on the test tomorrow, you need to find that point of intersection, that common point that they share. And that is the coordinate -2, -3. So you need to not only graph it correctly, you'll get, in order for you to get full credit, you need to graph it correctly, and you also need to state the correct answer, which we just said was -2, -3. If you have time, double check it. Your x is -2, your y is -3. Let's move on to number 2 over here, which is again on the answer sheet. You need to graph both of those. As you can see, these are not ready to graph. So what I'm going to do is use red ink for the top equation. I need to get y by itself, so I'm going to add 4x. That'll cancel it out. What I do to one side, I do to the other side, add 4x. And I need to rewrite this equation And the equation will be negative 2y equals 4x plus 4. And then after that, I need to divide by negative 2. Again, divide everything by negative 2. And my new equation in red, since I want to graph it in red, is y equals 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2x minus 2. And of course, you could look at your slope and put it over 1, because you always want rise over run. And your b value, you already know, is negative 2. So let's graph that new red equation that we have right there. Let me actually box it in for you. Let's graph this equation right here. So that does cross at negative 2. And from that point, I'm going to go down 2 over 1. I'm going down because it's negative. And of course, let's use that pattern backwards. Let's go to the left one and up 2, to the left one and up 2. Use the backwards pattern to extend it all the way through. And now we need to graph the other equation, and I'm going to do this other equation in blue. So this equation, it almost is ready to graph. All I need to do is divide by negative 1, because it's really a negative 1 times y right there. So I need to divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1. And all that really does is change all the signs. So my blue equation is y equals negative 2, you could put over 1 with an x, minus 2. Now, if you compare the blue equation with the red equation, they're the same exact equation, right? Let's say you didn't notice that right from the start. Well, then go ahead and graph it. It crosses the y at negative 2, same exact spot. And then from that point, you're going to go down 2 over 1, same thing. Using the pattern backwards, same thing, same thing, same thing. So we know that we end up with the same identical line. They land on top of each other, right? Now, remember, we are trying to find the point of intersection, the point that they share. On number 1, that was the point that they share. It's the only point that the red line and the blue line have in common. Now over here, how many points do they have in common? There's an infinite amount of points. So on your answer, you're going to put infinitely many solutions. You can write it out. You could abbreviate if you want. But again, remember this, guys. On this test, I need to see some work. If you just write IMS and I don't see this work up here and I don't see a line on top of another line over here, you will not get the credit. Okay, you need to show your work. So that's the first 2 questions on the practice test. It'll be almost identical to the first 2 questions on the actual test tomorrow. Now let's go back to the front side of this thing, of this test. Now notice questions 3 and 4 say use graphs of 1 and 2 to answer the following. It says, which graph is an inconsistent system? Is it number 1? Is it number 2? Is it both of them that are inconsistent, or is it neither of them? Remember, inconsistent, according to our word wall over here, inconsistent would mean that they do not intersect. They're parallel. Separate lines that never cross. They're parallel. So on number 3, when I say which graph is inconsistent, and you look at your answers that you just graphed, number 1, number 2, both of them are neither, the answer would be neither. This is consistent independent, and this one's consistent dependent. So it's asking which one's inconsistent. That's what it says. It says which one's inconsistent. Well, it's not number 1, it's not number 2, it's definitely not both, it is neither. So your answer is neither, okay? Now remember, you need to write all your answers on the back side, which is your answer sheet. So you guys are going to be flipping the paper back and forth. So question number 3 is neither. Okay, let's move on to question number 4. Let's see number 4 right here. 4 says, which graph is a consistent independent system? On the word wall, consistent independent has one answer, 1 point in common. So which one was that from our answers over here? It's number 1, right? Consistent independent, that's number 1. Consistent dependent. So the answer to number 3, which graph is a consistent independent system? The answer is number 1, is a consistent independent system. So again, you have to transfer all your answers to the answer sheet. So this was number 4, and the answer number 4, which one was consistent independent? That was number 1. So that's what you're going to write on the answer sheet. So far we have 4 questions done on this 100-point summative Chapter 6 test. Let's move on to the next portion of this test. It says, solve the following systems with the method of your choice. Now, notice what it says here. If your work is not shown or not understandable, then you will not get credit, even if you have the right answer. So I need to see some work, and I need to see that it's the correct work. And you know what? I do have the right, even if you have the correct work, to ask you to explain it to me. And if you cannot explain it to me, that means you don't know how to do it. If I have you try to rewrite it and do the problem over again and you're just blanked out, that means that you don't know it. So please make sure that you show your work, and please make sure that you're able to explain it to me if I ask you how you did whatever work you do. Now, notice on this part of the test, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 systems, and you get to choose what kind of systems you want to do. I mean, not what method you want to use on these systems. Now, notice this practice test number 5 says pick from the homework. So if I were you, I would go to, let's say, .4 WSPM. You could look at some from the elimination method. You could pick some of those, and I would write those in for numbers 5 or 6. Or perhaps go to your homework, the latest one, 6.5 WSPM. This is a good one because it says it's like kind of like what we're doing on the section, determine the best method. So I would go through these and maybe just pick one and jot it in right there onto questions 5 and 6 on the actual test. And you could write your system there, and then you could solve it. Who knows, you might pick the same exact system that I pick on the test because I do pick questions from the homework. I'm going to jump to number 7. And what method is best right here? Are they lined up? X's on top of X's. Nope. Y's are not on top of Y's. Equal or not on top of equal. Numbers are not on top of numbers. So this is not a good method to use elimination. It's not a good idea to use elimination method. But it would be a good idea to use substitution. It would obviously not be good to graph because they're not in y equals mx plus b. But it does have x by itself. So when x or y is by itself, you take that value, the 4 minus 2y, and you plug it into the equation you have not used into the variable that it actually equals. If this would have said y equals some stuff, I would plug in the stuff into y. But because it says x equals some stuff, I plug it into the x. So what I'm going to do is rewrite my new equation. Let me make some space for it. I'm going to rewrite my new equation, and it's going to read 6x, but instead of x, I put parentheses, minus y equals negative 145. So that x value is 4 minus 2y. And what I need to do is distribute 6 times 4, that is 24, distribute 6 times negative 2y, that's negative 12y, and then bring down the rest, the minus y, the equals, and the negative 145. So we've distributed. We also need to combine like terms. So I want to combine this negative 2y with this negative 1y. It's like if I owed somebody $12 and I owe them $1 more. My new equation will be, let me bring down the 24. But again, I owe 12, I owe 1. I'm going to owe 13 of those y's. And then it equals negative 145. Now, I still need to solve this equation, so I'm going to get rid of the 24 by subtracting 24. What I do to one side, I do to the other side. And of course, you can use a calculator, and you should use a calculator. We're going to go negative 13y equals negative 145 minus 24 on a calculator is negative 169. And of course, we're going to divide by negative 13. So we divide by negative 13, we get 13. So y equals positive 13. Because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So we have one answer, we still need the other answer. We're going to plug it back into any equation we want. I want to take this y value of 13 and plug it right there. So it's going to read x equals 4 minus 2 times, and I'm plugging in 13 right here. That becomes x equals 4 minus 26, which really is x equals negative 22. Ladies and gentlemen, your answer is negative 22, 13 in coordinate format. Now this is number 7. So on number 7, you're going to plug it in, you're going to write it over here on the back side of your test, negative 22, 13. Of course, if you have time, plug it back in to double check. Let's move on to number 8. This one, you're probably thinking maybe I should substitute, because I could plug in this 2x minus 3 into the y, and which you could. But notice that they're both in y equals mx plus b form. So even though there is no graph, you could clearly see that both have the b value of -3. So right here showing your work, you could either do a quick sketch that it crosses at -1, 2, 3. So this top equation crosses at 3, and you go up 2 over 1. So you have that line right there. And the other equation, on a graph it in red, it crosses also at -3, and it's going to go down 1 over 2. And as you can see, there's your point of intersection, and that coordinate is 0, -3. Okay, you're at the origin. You don't want to go left on the x. You don't want to go right on the x. So you want to stay at 0 on the x, and you do want to go down 3 on the y. So that would be -3 on the y. So your answer is 0, -3 for number 8. Flipping the paper over to document that answer, that'd be 0, -3 for number 8. Let's move on to number 9. This one is not ready for substitution. It's not ready for graphing. It is ready for linear combinations. You just have to modify 1 or 2 equations to get something to cancel. So the question is, do you want to cancel out x's or do you want to cancel out y's? I think x's are a little easier to cancel. How would I get this 2x to cancel with this -7x? Well, you need a positive value and a negative value, which it already is positive, it already is negative, but you want the exact opposite values. So I'm going to convert the 2x to a 14x. How am I going to do that? I'm going to multiply it by 7. It's going to become 14x, and then when I distribute 7 times 5, that's 35y. And don't forget to distribute all the way to the last number on the other side of the equal sign, equals -7. Now the bottom one, I am going to change that -7x to a -14x by multiplying by 2. So 2 times -7, that's -14x. 2 times 8, that is 16y. And 2 times 80, that is 160. Now it's ready to combine the lines, and the x's eliminate. And 35 plus 16 is 51. You could use a calculator. Equals 160 take away 7, that's 153. Again, you could use a calculator. Go ahead and divide that simple one-step blue equation by 51 on both sides, and you will get your answer, y equals 3. That is one answer. We need the other answer. Let's plug it back into the original. I am going to go with the top equation. You could use the bottom, but the top one looks a little easier. So on the top, I have 2x plus 5y equals -1. So that y value is 3 that I'm plugging in there. So I really have the equation 2x plus 15 equals -1. I need to solve, get x by itself on the left side of the equal sign, so I need to get rid of the 15 by subtracting 15. Subtracting 15. My new equation is 2x equals -16, which means my final step would be to divide by 2. Divide by 2. X does equal -8. Ladies and gentlemen, on your answer sheet, you're going to use the coordinate, or write the answer as a coordinate, -8, 3. Let's flip the paper over and write that for number 9. -8, 3 on number 9. Moving on to number 10. Flip it over. We're at number 10. Again, it's ready to combine. Sorry, I should have lined it up better, but it is x's on top of x's, y's on top of y's. The easier option would be to cancel out y's in this case. Here's +1y, here's -3y. So you could convert that bottom equation to become a negative or a +3y by simply multiplying by 3. So let me do this. Let me rewrite the top equation. I'm going to just leave it the same. And the bottom equation, I'm actually going to distribute 3 times 6, 18. 3 times 1y, that's +3y. And 3 times 1, that is 3. And now it's ready to combine and eliminate. So we end up with 26x equals 13. Now, I know a lot of us start freaking out because this is a simple one-step equation. However, when I divide by 26, I end up with something that most of you don't like. X equals 1/2. You have to reduce by 13. And I'll tell you this, on tomorrow's test, you will end up with one of these x or y values being 1/2, and you do have to plug it back in to find your other value. So when we take this x value of 1/2 and plug it back in, let's say to the bottom one, it looks a little easier. You first rewrite the bottom one, 6x, but instead of x, we're going to plug in that 1/2 that we have x equal to. And then rewrite the rest, plus y equals 1. So it's really simple here. When you think 6 times 1/2, if you do it on the calculator, it is 3, right? I mean, even if you didn't have a calculator, you could put it over 1. 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. We all know, or should know, that half of 6 is 3. So we're going to rewrite this equation. 3 plus y equals 1. So you subtract 3 on both sides, and you end up with y equals -2. So even this problem that had an answer as a fraction is not that difficult. Of course, you're going to write your answer as 1/2 comma -2. And let's flip the paper over and write that as the answer. So here we are, and we said 1/2 comma -2 for number 10.